She stood naked in the sacred circle, moonlight painting her pale flesh silver, while the pack watched with eyes that had already written her epitaph. 18 years old today, and still human. Still broken. Still worthless. Shift, her father commanded from the edge of the clearing, his voice cracking like a whip. Alpha Zacharias of the Shadowmere pack had never learned to ask nicely. Shift, damn you. But her wolf remained silent, a ghost that had never chosen to haunt her bones. Around the circle, pack members shifted restlessly, their disappointment thick as blood in the air. Some had already begun to turn away. In their world, a wolf who couldn't shift was no wolf at all. That's enough. The voice cut through the night like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward the tree line where shadows bled together into the shape of a man. No, not a man. Something far more dangerous. Alpha Caleb of the Nightfall pack stepped into the clearing, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. His dark hair caught the moonlight, and his eyes, wolf eyes, even in human form, swept the gathered pack with predatory assessment. Daphne's father went rigid. Caleb. You're not welcome here. Debts don't care about welcome, Zacharias. Caleb's voice was velvet over steel. Behind him, his warriors emerged from the darkness like nightmares given form. You've had 5 years to pay what you owe. I've come to collect. The memory hit Daphne like a physical blow. 5 years ago, when the Bloodfang pack had invaded Shadowmere territory, her father had begged for help. Caleb had answered, bringing his warriors to die in Zacharias's war. 3 of Nightfall's finest had fallen defending Shadowmere lands, and the debt had been carved in blood and loss. I don't have the gold, Zacharias said, his alpha authority wilting under Caleb's stare. I don't want gold. Caleb's gaze found Daphne across the clearing, and she felt pinned like a butterfly to a board. I want her. The word sent ice through her veins. Around the circle, pack members exchanged glances. Some looked relieved, the broken daughter finally serving a purpose. Others seemed disturbed, though none dared speak. She's worthless, Zacharias protested, but his voice lacked conviction. She can't even shift. That makes her perfect for what I have in mind. Caleb moved closer, each step deliberate as a stalking predator. 3 warriors died because you couldn't defend what was yours. Your broken daughter seems like appropriate compensation. Rage flared in Daphne's chest, hot and wild. I'm not broken. The words tore from her throat before she could stop them. And I'm not property to be traded. Caleb stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Up close, he was even more intimidating, tall and broad-shouldered, with scars that spoke of battles won through violence. His smile was sharp enough to cut. You will be mine, he said simply. The only question is whether you walk to my territory with dignity or arrive dragged behind my horse like cargo. The casual cruelty of his words snapped something inside her. Before conscious thought could intervene, Daphne's hand flew toward his face, nails seeking his eyes. She wanted to mark him, to leave some evidence that she wouldn't submit quietly to this transaction. He caught her wrist effortlessly, his grip like iron. Interesting. The little wolf has claws after all. Go to hell, she snarled, trying to wrench free. I've been there. It's surprisingly comfortable once you settle in. His grip tightened, not quite painful but absolutely inescapable. You just volunteered for the difficult path. Before she could respond, Caleb released her wrist and stepped back. Zacharias, our business is concluded. Your debt is paid. He gestured to his warriors, who moved forward with predatory grace. Bring her. Wait. Daphne backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. You can't just. I can. I am. Caleb's voice cut through her protests like a blade. Your father owes me blood debt. You are payment in full. The Nightfall warriors surrounded her with professional efficiency. They didn't hurt her, but they made it clear that resistance would be both futile and painful. One of them, a scarred woman with silver streaking her dark hair, produced a length of rope. Please, Daphne whispered, hating herself for the word even as it left her lips. Caleb paused, his head tilting like a wolf scenting prey. Begging already? How disappointing. I thought you might have more fight in you. His smile was winter cold. But don't worry, there will be plenty of opportunities for you to prove your worth. The rope burned as they bound her hands, rough fibers scraping against her skin. Around the clearing, her pack, her family, watched in silence. Some looked guilty. Others seemed relieved. Her father stood like a statue, his face carved from stone. This is wrong, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is justice, Caleb interrupted. Your father's cowardice cost me 3 good wolves. Now his daughter will serve in their place. He moved closer again, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. Pray you're more useful than they were. The journey to Nightfall territory took 3 hours through dense forest that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Daphne walked between 2 warriors, the rope around her wrists held by the scarred woman who moved through the trees like smoke. Caleb led the procession, never looking back, never slowing when she stumbled over roots or stones. By the time they reached the Nightfall compound, Daphne's feet were bleeding and her legs shook with exhaustion. The packed ground sprawled before them like something from a nightmare, stone buildings that seemed to grow from the earth itself, surrounded by walls that spoke of siege and war. Welcome to your new home, Caleb said, his voice carrying mockery like poison. I hope you find it educational. They didn't take her to the main house. Instead, she was led to a stone building that squatted against the compound's far wall like a tumor. The interior was sparse, a single room with stone floors, stone walls, and a small barred window set too high to reach. A chain had been bolted to one wall, ending in a manacle that looked far too familiar with use. This is where you'll stay until you prove your value, Caleb explained as his warriors secured the manacle around her ankle. The metal was cold and unforgiving against her skin. You have 3 days. 3 days for what? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Caleb paused in the doorway, his silhouette filling the frame. To convince me you're worth keeping alive. His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Fail, and I'll find other buyers. There are always markets for pretty things, even broken ones. The door slammed shut with a sound like a coffin closing. In the sudden darkness, Daphne sank to the stone floor and finally allowed herself to tremble. The chain around her ankle was maybe 6 feet long, enough to reach the small bucket in the corner and the pile of straw that apparently served as bedding, but nothing more. 3 days. She had 3 days to prove she was worth more alive than sold to whatever nightmares Caleb had in mind. The problem was, she had no idea what he considered valuable. She couldn't shift. She had no special skills. She was exactly what her father had called her, worthless. But as she sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the Nightfall pack settling into their night routines, something stirred in her chest. Not her wolf, that remained stubbornly silent. Something else. Something that felt remarkably like rage. Caleb might own her body, might hold her chain, might have purchased her like livestock. But he didn't own her spirit. And if he thought she would break quietly, he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. 3 days to prove her worth? Fine. She'd give him 3 days he would never forget. Outside her prison, she could hear wolves howling in the distance. The sound should have been comforting, wolves calling to their pack, their family, their home. Instead, it sounded like a warning. Or perhaps a promise. Chapter 2. The first thing Caleb discovered about his new prisoner was that she didn't beg. 3 days had passed since he'd chained Daphne in the stone cell, 3 days of watching her through the small barred window. He'd expected tears by now. Broken pleas. The hollow-eyed submission that came when hope finally died. Instead, she sat in the corner like a coiled spring, her green eyes tracking his every movement with predatory focus. Interesting, he murmured, sliding the food tray through the slot at the bottom of her door. Basic provisions, bread, water, a thin soup that barely counted as sustenance. Enough to keep her alive, not enough to keep her strong. She didn't move toward the food. Didn't even acknowledge it was there. Not hungry? Caleb settled against the wall opposite her cell, making himself comfortable. This had become his evening ritual, watching the wolf who couldn't shift, trying to understand what made her different from every other prisoner who'd occupied this room. "I'd rather starve than eat scraps from your hand," Daphne said, her voice steady despite the hollows beginning to form beneath her cheekbones. "Admirable. Stupid, but admirable." He pulled an apple from his jacket, taking a deliberate bite. The sound seemed to echo in the small space. "Your pack celebrated, you know. After I took you." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. "Your father opened his best wine. Said it was the first useful thing you'd ever done." Caleb watched her face carefully, looking for cracks in that armor of defiance. "They toasted your sacrifice. Called it a blessing that the broken daughter finally served a purpose." "You're lying." The words came out flat, certain. "Am I?" He took another bite of the apple, savoring both the fruit and her barely controlled rage. "Your cousin Brenda was particularly vocal. Said maybe now the pack bloodline could be purified of weakness." Something flickered across Daphne's face, hurt, quickly buried beneath fury. There was truth in his words, and they both knew it. But instead of breaking, she lifted her chin higher. "If you're trying to break me with stories, you'll be disappointed. I already knew what they thought of me." Caleb found himself smiling despite the irritation building in his chest. Most prisoners would be sobbing by now, begging him to take them home, promising anything for mercy. This one met his cruelty with steel-edged calm that shouldn't have existed in someone so young, so powerless. "Stand up," he commanded. She didn't move. "I said stand up." His voice carried the full weight of alpha authority, the kind of command that forced submission from even the strongest wolves. Daphne remained seated, her green eyes never leaving his face. "No." The simple refusal hit him like a physical blow. In 32 years of life, no one had ever simply said no to his alpha command. Not pack members, not prisoners, not even enemy alphas in the heat of battle. The word hung between them like a thrown gauntlet. "You're either very brave or very stupid," Caleb said slowly. "Maybe both." She shifted slightly, the chain around her ankle clinking against stone. "Are you going to keep talking, or can I get back to planning your death in peace?" Despite himself, Caleb laughed. The sound was dark and genuine, echoing off the stone walls. "I like you, broken wolf. You're going to be entertaining." "I'm not broken." The words came out like a snarl, and for just a moment, he caught something in her scent, something wild and dangerous that made his wolf sit up and take notice. "Prove it." He stood, pulling a key from his pocket. "Tomorrow night, you'll serve at the pack dinner. Show them you're worth more than meat for the fighting rings. I won't be your entertainment. You'll be whatever I tell you to be." The lock clicked open, but he didn't step inside. "Not yet. Unless you prefer to test how long you can actually survive on stubbornness alone." The great hall of the Nightfall pack thrummed with conversation and the clatter of dishes. Long tables filled the space, packed with wolves who radiated the casual violence of predators at the top of the food chain. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and dominance. Daphne moved between the tables like a ghost, a tray balanced in her hands and Caleb's warning echoing in her ears. "Serve them well, or I'll find other uses for you." The chain was gone from her ankle, but she could feel invisible bonds just as strong. 2 guards flanked the exits, their eyes never leaving her. "Look what the alpha dragged in," sneered a woman with silver-streaked hair as Daphne approached her table. "The famous broken wolf of Shadowmere." Daphne set down plates of food without responding, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. 3 days of minimal food had left her weak, but she'd be damned if she'd let them see it. "I heard she can't even shift," another wolf called out, loud enough for half the hall to hear. "What's the point of keeping a defective?" "Entertainment," suggested a scarred male with yellow eyes. "Place your bets. How long before she begs for mercy?" "I give her a week, the silver-haired woman said, studying Daphne like a piece of meat. She's got fight in her, but they all break eventually. 3 days, countered another. Look at her, she's already shaking. Daphne's hand tightened on the tray, but she continued serving. Let them think her trembling was fear instead of barely controlled rage. Let them underestimate her. She'd survived 18 years in a pack that saw her as worthless. She could survive this too. What do you think, Alpha? The scarred male called to the high table where Caleb sat watching the proceedings with dark amusement. What's your wager on the broken wolf? Caleb's eyes found hers across the crowded hall, and something passed between them, a challenge, a promise, a warning. I think, he said, his voice carrying easily through the sudden quiet, that you're all about to be surprised. The words shouldn't have warmed her. Shouldn't have felt like unexpected support from an enemy who'd bought her like livestock. But something in his tone made her spine straighten, made her chin lift despite the exhaustion weighing down her limbs. She finished serving the table in silence, ignoring the continued commentary on her worth, her future, her inevitable breaking. When she finally returned to the kitchens for another tray, her hands had stopped shaking. The night wore on with endless trips between kitchen and hall, endless sneers, and casual cruelty from wolves who saw her as something less than human. By the time the last dishes were cleared, Daphne's feet were bleeding in her borrowed shoes and her vision had started to blur around the edges. Not bad, Caleb said as the guards escorted her back toward her cell. You lasted longer than expected. I won't break. The words came out more breathless than she'd intended, but they carried fierce conviction. No, he agreed, studying her with those unsettling dark eyes. You won't, will you? Something in his tone made her look up sharply. There was no mockery there, no cruel amusement. Just a kind of dark fascination that made her skin prickle with unwelcome awareness. The escape attempt came on the 5th night. Daphne had been planning it since her first hour in captivity, studying guard patterns, testing the strength of window bars, mapping every inch of the compound during her supervised trips to the kitchen. The guards grew careless around the broken wolf who couldn't shift, couldn't fight, couldn't pose any real threat. They were wrong on all counts. She waited until the deep hours of night when the compound settled into quiet. The lock on her cell was old, corroded, and she'd been working at it with a bent spoon stolen from the kitchens. It took her an hour to finally force the mechanism, another hour to slip past the dozing guard outside. The compound walls were high but climbable, especially for someone desperate enough not to care about the fall on the other side. She'd made it halfway up the stone barrier when the howl split the night, not alarm, but hunting call. They discovered her absence. Going somewhere? Caleb's voice came from directly below her, calm and amused. Daphne looked down to find him standing in the shadows, still fully dressed despite the late hour. As if he'd been waiting. You expected this, she said, not bothering to climb down. If they were going to recapture her, they'd have to work for it. I hoped for it. He moved closer to the wall, close enough that she could see the sharp smile on his face. I was beginning to think you lacked initiative. Let me go. The words came out stronger than she felt. You have your payment. Find another slave. But you're so much more interesting than the others. His eyes glittered in the moonlight. Come down, Daphne. You've proven your point. Which point is that? That you're exactly as dangerous as I suspected. She stared down at him, trying to read the strange undertone in his voice. There was something different about him tonight, something that made her wolf sense prickle with warning even though her actual wolf remained stubbornly silent. Come down, he repeated, and this time it carried the weight of alpha command. Her hands tightened on the stone, but she found herself climbing down anyway. Not because of his command, she'd proven she could resist that. But because something in his scent had changed, something that made her skin feel too tight and her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. The moment her feet touched ground, guards emerged from the shadows to surround her. But Caleb held up a hand, stopping them. Leave us. Alpha, one of them started. Leave. Us. The command brooked no argument. When they were alone, Caleb stepped closer. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could see the strange intensity burning in his dark eyes. "You smell different," he said softly, the words barely more than a whisper. "What?" Daphne backed against the wall, suddenly aware of how isolated they were, how much larger he was than her. "Your scent. It's..." He stopped, jaw tightening as if fighting against words that wanted to spill out. "It's wrong. I don't understand." "Neither do I." His hand slammed against the stone beside her head, close enough that she could feel the wind from it. "But I intend to figure it out." The full moon hung overhead like a silver eye, and in its light, Daphne saw something that made her breath catch. Caleb's eyes weren't entirely human anymore. His wolf was close to the surface, closer than should have been safe outside of a shift. "What's happening?" she whispered. "You tell me." His voice had gone rough, almost a growl. "Because something about you is driving my wolf insane, and I don't believe in coincidences." Before she could respond, he spun away from her, running a hand through his dark hair. When he turned back, his expression had shuttered closed, all traces of that strange vulnerability gone. "Back to your cell," he commanded. "And if you try to escape again, the consequences will be far more severe." "What kind of consequences?" His smile was sharp enough to cut. "The kind that will make you wish I'd left you with your father." But as they walked back toward the stone building that served as her prison, Daphne caught him watching her from the corner of his eye. There was something hungry in that look, something that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with a need he clearly didn't want to acknowledge. The full moon beat down on them both, and in its silver light, she caught a scent that made her still human heart skip a beat. Pack bond. Mate bond. The thing that tied wolves together for life. Impossible. She couldn't shift, couldn't be anyone's mate. But as Caleb locked her back in her cell, his hands lingering on the metal longer than necessary, she saw her own confusion reflected in his eyes. Something was happening between them, something that went against everything they both thought they knew. And from the fury in his expression, Caleb was just as trapped by it as she was. "Sleep well, broken wolf," he said, but his voice carried none of its usual mockery. As his footsteps faded into the night, Daphne pressed her back against the stone wall and tried to understand what had just changed between them. The air still hummed with tension, with possibility, with something that felt dangerously like destiny. Outside her window, the moon smiled down like it knew a secret neither of them was ready to face. Chapter 3. The horn's blast shattered the pre-dawn silence like breaking glass. Daphne's eyes snapped open in her cell, heart already racing before her mind caught up to the sound. Around the compound, wolves howled in response, not the mournful calls of mourning, but the sharp, excited yips of predators scenting prey. "Time to run, little wolf." Caleb's voice drifted through the barred window, dark with anticipation. She scrambled to her feet as the cell door swung open, revealing him silhouetted against the corridor's torchlight. He'd shed his usual human facade tonight, his eyes held the wild gleam of his wolf, and power radiated from him like heat from a forge. "What's happening?" But even as she asked, she caught the scent drifting on the night air. Other wolves. Strangers. Moving through the forest that bordered nightfall territory. "Survival test," Caleb said, stepping aside to let her pass. "Prove you're worth keeping, or prove you're not." The pack had gathered in the courtyard, 30 wolves in human form buzzing with predatory energy. They turned as one when Caleb appeared, and Daphne felt the weight of their collective stare like a physical thing. These weren't the same wolves who'd mocked her in the dining hall. These were hunters, and she was about to become their quarry. "The rules are simple," Caleb announced, his voice carrying easily across the assembled pack. "Our guest has until sunrise to reach the old watchtower on Raven's Ridge. If she makes it, she earns a place here. If not..." He shrugged, the gesture casual as death. "And if she gets lost," called out Zacharias, a lean wolf with scars marking his throat. "These woods can be dangerous at night." Caleb's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Then she'd better not get lost." A sick understanding crawled up Daphne's spine. They weren't just going to chase her through the woods, they were going to hunt her. Hunt her like prey, like the animal they believed her to be. "You're insane," she breathed. "Probably." Caleb moved closer, close enough that she could see the predatory gleam in his dark eyes. "But insanity keeps things interesting. You have a 10-minute head start. Use it wisely." He pressed something into her palm, a small hunting knife, its blade gleaming silver in the moonlight. "Try not to disappoint me." The knife was cold against her skin, heavier than it looked. Around them, the pack had begun to shift restlessly, some already showing signs of the change, eyes gleaming yellow, canines extending, the subtle wrongness that came just before a wolf abandoned human form. 10 minutes, Caleb repeated, and this time his voice carried the rough edge of approaching transformation. "Starting now." Daphne ran. The forest swallowed her like a living thing, branches catching at her clothes and hair as she plunged deeper into the darkness. Behind her, she could hear the pack's excited voices fading as she put distance between herself and the compound. But she knew it was temporary. Soon enough, they'd come after her, and then the real test would begin. The knife bounced against her palm as she ran, its weight both comfort and reminder. Caleb had armed her, which meant he expected her to fight. The question was whether he expected her to win. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver patches, providing just enough light to avoid the largest trees but not enough to see the roots and stones that threatened to send her sprawling with every step. Her human eyes weren't designed for night running, weren't equipped for the kind of chase that was coming. But her mind was. 18 years of being the weakest member of her pack had taught her survival skills that had nothing to do with claws and fangs. She knew how to move quietly, how to mask her scent, how to think like prey so she could avoid becoming it. The watchtower on Raven's Ridge. She'd heard of it, an old border marker from the territorial wars, maybe 5 miles through rough terrain. In daylight, with a clear path, it would be a challenging hike. In darkness, pursued by wolves who knew these woods like their own heartbeat? Impossible. Unless that was the point. A howl split the night behind her, high and wild and entirely too close. They'd started the chase early, or her head start had been shorter than promised. Either way, the game had begun. Daphne angled toward a creek she could hear babbling somewhere to her left. Water would mask her scent, at least temporarily, and the rocky streambed might hide her trail. It wasn't much of an advantage, but she'd learned to make do with less. The creek was ice-cold and knee-deep, soaking through her boots within seconds. She gritted her teeth against the chill and began working her way upstream, using exposed stones to avoid leaving prints in the muddy banks. Behind her, the howls grew closer, more frequent. They were spreading out, trying to encircle her before she could reach whatever safety the watchtower represented. That's when she caught the scent that made her blood freeze. Not just nightfall wolves. Others. Strangers with the musk of different territory, different allegiances. Moving through the forest with purpose that had nothing to do with her little survival game. An ambush. Rival packs taking advantage of the hunt to move against Caleb's territory. Daphne crouched in the icy water, mind racing. She could try to reach the watchtower, complete the test, hope that Caleb's wolves could handle whatever was coming. Or she could double back, warn them about the approaching threat. The smart choice was obvious. Let them tear each other apart while she escaped into the night. Find her way to neutral territory, disappear into the human world where pack politics couldn't touch her. But as another howl echoed through the darkness, this one definitely not from nightfall wolves, she found herself turning back toward the compound. She was still Caleb's prisoner. Still the property he'd bought with her father's debt. But something in her rebelled against the idea of letting him walk into an ambush, even if it would solve all her problems. The trek back took precious time she couldn't afford. By the time she reached the edge of the compound, the attack had already begun. Snarls and screams filled the night air as wolves tore into each other with fangs and claws. Bodies littered the courtyard, some in human form, others caught mid-transformation, a few who died as wolves and reverted to human shape in death. Daphne pressed herself against the compound wall, trying to make sense of the chaos. 3 separate packs, at least, all identifiable by their distinct scents. Nightfall was outnumbered, but they fought with the desperate fury of wolves defending their home territory. Through the melee, she caught sight of Caleb in his massive black wolf form, blood matting his fur as he tore through enemies with savage efficiency. But even as she watched, more rival wolves poured through the compound gates. They were going to be overwhelmed. The knife was still in her hand, silver blade gleaming in the firelight from burning buildings. She'd never killed anyone before, never even seriously hurt another person. But as she watched Caleb's pack, her captors, her tormentors, but somehow still her pack, falling to superior numbers, something cold and violent settled in her chest. She moved like a shadow along the compound wall, using the chaos to mask her approach. The rival wolves were focused on the main battle, confident in their numbers. They weren't watching for threats from unexpected directions. The first one never saw her coming. The silver blade slid between his ribs like it was meant to be there, and he dropped without a sound. She caught his body before it could fall, lowering him gently to avoid drawing attention. The second was harder. He caught her scent at the last moment, spinning with a snarl that died as her knife found his throat. But his death cry rang out across the courtyard, and suddenly she had the attention of far too many wolves. "The human," one of them roared. "Kill the human." They came at her in a rush, 3 massive shapes with murder in their eyes. Daphne backed against the wall, knife raised, knowing it was hopeless but refusing to go down quietly. The attack never came. Caleb materialized between them like a force of nature, his black wolf form streaked with blood and fury. He didn't just fight the rival wolves, he demolished them, tearing through them with a violence that was terrible to watch. When it was over, he stood over their broken bodies, muzzle dripping red, yellow eyes fixed on Daphne with an intensity that made her knees weak. Then he shifted, the change rippling through him until he stood before her in human form, naked and covered in blood that wasn't entirely his own. "You came back," he said, voice rough with exhaustion and something that might have been wonder. "I know." She couldn't explain it herself. "I should have kept running." "Yes. You should have." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Why didn't you?" Before she could answer, the sounds of battle began to fade around them. The surviving rival wolves were retreating, dragging their wounded with them. Nightfall had held, but barely. "Because," Daphne said finally, meeting his stare without flinching, "someone had to watch your back." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, some wall cracking that had been in place since the moment they'd met. For just an instant, she saw past the alpha mask to something raw and vulnerable beneath. "Daphne," he started, then stopped as one of his warriors approached. "Alpha," the wolf said, favoring an injured leg. "We've secured the perimeter. The Blood Fawn survivors are retreating toward the eastern border." "Good." Caleb didn't take his eyes off Daphne. "See to our wounded. I'll be along shortly." When they were alone again, he reached out to touch the knife still clutched in her bloody hand. "You killed for us. I killed for you." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, raw and honest in the aftermath of violence. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and stained with the same blood that marked her blade. "Why?" "I don't know." It was the truth, even if it left her feeling exposed. "Maybe because you're mine to kill, not theirs." Caleb's laugh was low and dark, but there was something almost fond in it. "Is that what this is? You protecting your right to murder me?" "Maybe." She didn't pull away from his touch, even though every rational thought screamed that she should. "Or maybe I'm just tired of other people trying to own what belongs to me." "And what belongs to you?" The question hung between them like a challenge, like a promise, like the beginning of something that would change everything. Around them, the compound was settling into the aftermath of battle, wounds being tended, bodies being counted, damage being assessed. But in this moment, there was only the two of them and the truth that neither wanted to acknowledge. "You tell me," Daphne said finally. Caleb's eyes searched hers for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant when his control finally cracked. when he stopped fighting the pull that had been building between them since that first night under the full moon. "You dangerous, impossible woman," he murmured, and then his mouth was on hers, hungry and desperate and tasting of blood and victory. She kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her rage and confusion and unwanted attraction into the connection between them. He was her captor, her tormentor, the alpha who'd bought her like property. He was also, she was beginning to realize, hers in ways that had nothing to do with chains or ownership and everything to do with the bond that pulled at her bones whenever he was near. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Everything," she corrected. "This changes everything." Because it did. The kiss, the battle, the choice to come back when she could have run, it had shifted something fundamental between them. They were still enemies, still predator and prey caught in a deadly game. But now they were something else too. Something more dangerous than hatred, more complicated than simple desire. They were beginning to become partners. And in the world of wolves, where strength was everything and weakness meant death, that partnership might be the most terrifying thing of all. Chapter 4. 3 months of this dance, and Daphne finally understood the rules. She slipped the vial into Caleb's wine with hands that didn't shake, watching the clear liquid disappear into the red vintage like it had never existed. Wolfsbane extract, not enough to kill an alpha, but certainly enough to make him wish he was dead for a few hours. "Interesting vintage," Caleb murmured, lifting the goblet to examine the wine in the candlelight. They were alone in his private chambers, a privilege she'd earned through months of perfect behavior. Or so he thought. "Your sommelier recommended it," Daphne replied, settling into the chair across from his desk with practiced grace. "Something about it pairing well with vengeance." Caleb's hand paused halfway to his lips, dark eyes sharpening as they focused on her face. "Vengeance? Drink up." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "It'll help wash down the taste of your own medicine." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb set the goblet down very carefully, the soft clink of glass against wood loud in the sudden silence. "Wolfsbane," he said, not a question. "Not enough to kill you." "Pity." Daphne leaned back in her chair, finally allowing 3 months of perfect submission to fall away like a discarded mask. "Just enough to make you feel as helpless as you've made me feel every single day since you dragged me here. You think poisoning me will solve your problems? I think it'll make me feel better." She studied her nails with feigned casualness. "Do you know what I dream about every night, Caleb? Enlighten me." "Killing you." The words came out conversational, almost pleasant. Slowly. Creatively. "I've planned your death in 100 different ways, each one more satisfying than the last." Caleb reached for something beneath his desk, an alarm, a weapon, she didn't know and didn't care. The wolfsbane was already working, she could see it in the slight tremor that ran through his hand, the way his breathing had begun to shallow. "But that's not all I dream about," she continued, rising from her chair to pace around his desk like a predator circling wounded prey. "I also dream about kissing you. About what it would feel like to have you lose control. About whether you'd be gentler than the monster you pretend to be." Daphne, his voice was rougher now, the alpha authority beginning to fray at the edges. "Don't." She slammed her palm against the desk, hard enough to make the goblet jump. "Don't you dare try to command me. Not now. Not when you're finally going to listen." The poison was hitting him harder now. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his wolf was clearly fighting the chemical invasion, but even alpha healing had limits. He'd be down for hours, maybe longer. "You want to know the truth?" Daphne leaned over him, close enough to see the fury building behind his pain. "I hate you. I hate everything you've done to me, everything you've made me become. But I hate myself more for wanting you anyway. You think this changes anything?" Caleb's words came out slurred, but his eyes still burned with dark fire. "You think one desperate act makes you powerful?" "No." She straightened, looking down at him with something that might have been pity. "But it makes us even." That's when he laughed, a sound like breaking glass that made her skin crawl. Even? He struggled to his feet, using the desk for support but somehow still radiating danger despite the poison coursing through his system. You think we're even? Before she could respond, he pulled something from his desk drawer, a pair of silver-lined restraints that gleamed like liquid moonlight. Her blood went cold as she recognized them. Old pack punishment tools, designed to burn just enough to remind a wolf of their place without causing permanent damage. Caleb, don't. You poisoned me. His voice was deadly quiet now, all traces of the affected slur gone. Did you really think I wouldn't have built up immunity to wolfsbane over the years? That I wouldn't recognize the taste the moment it touched my tongue? Understanding hit her like a physical blow. He'd known. From the very first sip, he'd known what she'd done, and he'd let her play out her little revenge fantasy while planning his response. You're insane, she breathed, backing toward the door. Probably. The restraints clicked as he tested them, silver singing against silver. But at least I'm honest about my monsters. She ran. Down corridors she'd memorized over months of captivity, past startled guards who moved to intercept her, through common rooms where pack members looked up in alarm. But Caleb's voice followed her, amplified by alpha authority and carrying to every corner of the compound. Find her. Bring her back. Now. They cornered her in the courtyard, a dozen wolves forming a circle that tightened with each passing second. Daphne spun in place, looking for an escape that didn't exist, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. Nowhere to run, Caleb said, emerging from the main building with predatory grace. The poison should have had him on his knees, but he moved like it was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Just like that first night. I won't let you chain me again. The words came out stronger than she felt. I won't be your prisoner anymore. You were never my prisoner. He stepped into the circle, and his wolves backed away to give them space. You were my obsession. The admission hung between them like a thrown blade, sharp and dangerous and cutting deep. Around them, the pack watched with the avid attention of predators sensing violence. What's that supposed to mean? But even as she asked, Daphne could see the truth in his eyes, something raw and hungry that had nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with need. It means, Caleb said, circling her like she was prey, that I didn't buy you to pay your father's debt. I could have taken gold, taken land, taken any number of things that would have settled what he owed. Then why? Because you reminded me of someone. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see her own reflection in his dark eyes. A broken wolf who refused to bend, no matter how much the world tried to break them. Someone who stared down their own pack's hatred and spat in the face of destiny. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. You're talking about yourself. I'm talking about us. His hand came up to cup her cheek, the touch gentle despite the silver restraint still gleaming in his other hand. Two monsters who never learned how to be anything else. I'm not a monster. But the words came out uncertain, because she'd felt it building inside her for months, something dark and violent that had nothing to do with the wolf she'd never been able to shift. Aren't you? Caleb's thumb traced her cheekbone, and she shivered despite herself. You tried to poison me tonight. You told me you dream about killing me. If that's not monstrous, what is? It's survival. The answer came from somewhere deep, somewhere honest. It's what you made me become. No. His grip tightened, not painful but inescapable. It's what you always were. I just gave you permission to stop hiding. Before she could respond, his mouth was on hers, not gentle, not romantic, but desperate and hungry and full of months of denied attraction. She should have pulled away, should have fought him, should have remembered that he was her captor and her tormentor. Instead, she kissed him back with equal violence, pouring all her rage and confusion and unwanted desire into the connection between them. He tasted like wine and danger and something uniquely his own that made her blood sing in ways it never had before. That's when it happened. The change hit her like lightning, starting deep in her bones and radiating outward until every cell in her body was on fire. But this wasn't the golden transformation she'd seen other wolves experience. This was something darker, colder, like moonlight filtered through black water. She broke away from Caleb with a gasp, doubling over as her spine began to elongate and shift. Around them, the pack backed away with expressions of shock and something that looked like fear. "Impossible," someone whispered. But Caleb just smiled, his own eyes beginning to gleam with inhuman light. "Finally," he murmured. "There you are." The transformation tore through her like a storm, reshaping bone and muscle and skin until she stood on 4 legs instead of 2. But her new form was wrong somehow, not the typical gray or brown of normal wolves, but pure black with eyes that gleamed like silver stars. A shadow wolf. She'd heard the legends but never believed them, wolves born to balance the light, creatures of darkness and pain who fed on the emotions others tried to hide. Around her, the Nightfall pack had gone completely silent, their earlier excitement replaced by something approaching reverence. Even the most dominant among them lowered their heads in unconscious submission. Caleb shifted as well, his own massive black form materializing where his human body had been. But where her wolf was shadow and starlight, his was solid darkness, an alpha's wolf, powerful and commanding, but somehow perfectly matched to her ethereal form. They circled each other in the ancient dance of wolfkind, testing and challenging and learning. When he lunged, she was ready, not to submit, but to fight back with equal ferocity. They rolled across the courtyard in a tangle of fur and fangs, neither giving ground, both refusing to yield. This wasn't dominance and submission. This was recognition. 2 predators who had finally found their equal. When they separated, both breathing hard, Daphne felt something click into place deep in her chest. The mate bond she'd sensed but never understood suddenly blazed to life, connecting her to Caleb in ways that went beyond the physical. She could feel his emotions now, the rage and desire and possessive need that had driven him to bring her here. But underneath it all was something else, something he'd never let himself acknowledge. Love. Twisted and dark and probably unhealthy, but love nonetheless. They shifted back to human form slowly, the change somehow easier now that her wolf had finally awakened. When Daphne stood naked in the moonlight, she felt different, not broken, not powerless, but something new and dangerous and entirely her own. "A shadow wolf," Caleb said softly, wonder coloring his voice. "I thought they were extinct." "So did I." Daphne looked down at her hands, still half expecting to see claws. "What does this mean?" "It means," he said, reaching out to touch her face again, "that you were never broken. You were just waiting for the right catalyst." The silver restraints lay forgotten in the dirt where he dropped them during his transformation. Looking at them now, Daphne felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep, not humor, but something darker. "You were going to chain me again," she said. "I was going to try." Caleb's smile was rueful. "But I think we both know that's not possible anymore." Because it wasn't. Whatever she'd become tonight, whatever power now flowed through her veins, it had shifted the balance between them completely. She was no longer his prisoner, his property, his anything. She was his equal. His match. His mate. And in the world of wolves, that changed everything. "So what happens now?" she asked. Caleb's answer was a growl that spoke of possession and promise and the beginning of something that would be either salvation or damnation for them both. "Now," he said, "we stop pretending to be something we're not." In the distance, thunder rumbled across the sky, and Daphne smiled. The storm that had been building between them for months was finally about to break. And she had a feeling that when it was over, neither of them would be the same. Chapter 5. Blood dripped from Daphne's split lip onto the stone floor of the great hall, each drop echoing like thunder in the sudden silence. Again, she snarled, wiping crimson from her mouth with the back of her hand. Caleb circled her like a predator, his own face bearing the marks of her claws. Around them, the Nightfall pack watched with the horrified fascination of wolves witnessing something that challenged every law of nature they'd ever known. "You're bleeding," he observed, voice carrying that infuriating note of casual concern. "So are you." Daphne shifted her weight, muscles coiling for another attack. "Getting tired, Alpha?" The title dripped with mockery, and she saw his eyes flash in response. "Good," She wanted him angry, wanted him to stop holding back, wanted him to treat her like the threat she'd become instead of the broken prisoner she'd once been. "This is madness," Zacharias whispered from the edge of the circle. "She's challenging for pack leadership. A shadow wolf can't." "Can't what?" Daphne's voice cut across his protest like a blade. "Can't fight? Can't lead? Can't be more than the pathetic creature you all believed I was?" She launched herself at Caleb before he could respond, shadow dark wolf form exploding into existence mid-leap. They collided in a tangle of fur and fangs, rolling across the stone floor in a display of violence that was somehow also a dance. This was their third challenge this week. Each time, she pushed him harder, tested his limits, demanded that he acknowledge what they both knew: she was no longer his prisoner. She was his equal, his match, his potential replacement. The pack didn't know what to make of it. Whispered conversations died when either of them entered a room. Wolves who'd once mocked her now gave her a wide berth, fear replacing their earlier contempt. They called her the Dark Queen in hushed tones, and Caleb the devil who'd awakened her. Neither of them minded the reputation. They separated with matching snarls, both bleeding, both breathing hard, both refusing to yield. Around them, the pack waited for a resolution that never came. Enough. Caleb shifted back to human form, naked and scarred and still radiating alpha authority despite the claw marks decorating his chest. "We have business to attend to." Daphne followed suit, her own naked form drawing appreciative glances that she ignored. Power radiated from her skin like heat, shadow wolf energy that made even the strongest pack members uncomfortable. "What business?" she demanded. "The kind that requires clothes." His smile was sharp as broken glass. "The Werewolf Council has requested an audience." The words hit the assembled pack like a physical blow. The council was old power, established authority, the governing body that kept the supernatural world in line. They didn't request audiences, they issued summons, and wolves who ignored them tended to disappear. "When?" Daphne asked, though she already suspected the answer. "They're already here." The council delegation waited in Caleb's private receiving room like vultures come to feast. 5 ancient wolves in human form, their combined age measuring in millennia, their power pressing against the walls like a living thing. At their head sat Elder Morrison, a man who'd been old when the American colonies were young. His pale eyes fixed on Daphne the moment she entered the room, and she felt the weight of his assessment like chains around her limbs. "So," he said, voice carrying the authority of ages, "this is the aberration." "Careful, Elder." Caleb's voice was silk over steel as he settled into his chair behind the massive oak desk. "That aberration is under my protection." "Is she?" Morrison's smile was winter cold. "Because reports suggest she's been challenging your authority quite publicly." Hardly the behavior of a grateful dependent. Daphne remained standing despite the obvious slight. No chair had been provided for her, a deliberate message about her place in this hierarchy. She met Morrison's stare without flinching, letting her own power rise to meet his. "I challenge him because he allows it," she said simply. "Because he's strong enough to face a real opponent instead of cowering behind traditions that died centuries ago." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Around Morrison, the other council members shifted restlessly, hands moving to weapons that should have been ceremonial. "Insolent child," hissed Elder Blackwood, a woman whose beauty hid the soul of a predator. "Do you know what you are? What your very existence represents? Enlighten me." "Chaos." Morrison leaned forward, pale eyes burning with conviction. "Shadow wolves were hunted to extinction for good reason. You feed on pain, on darkness, on everything that civilized wolves have spent centuries learning to control." "And yet," Caleb interjected, "she seems remarkably well controlled to me. For now." Elder Hulo spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "But shadow feeds on shadow, and corruption spreads. How long before she begins turning your pack? Before they learn to embrace the darkness she represents?" Daphne felt something cold settle in her stomach. There was truth in their words, even if she didn't want to acknowledge it. Since her transformation, she'd felt different. Hungrier. More willing to solve problems with violence, to feed on the fear and pain of those around her. "You've come here to pass judgment," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "We've come here to offer salvation." Morrison stood, his ancient power filling the room like smoke. "Surrender the shadow wolf for proper disposal, and the council will overlook your lapses in judgment. Continue to harbor her, and face the consequences." "What consequences?" Daphne asked, though she already suspected. "Death." Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade. "For both of you." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on Caleb's desk. Daphne could feel the weight of the moment, the choice that would define not just her fate but his. "I need time to consider," Caleb said finally. Morrison nodded as if he'd expected this response. "You have until tomorrow night. Choose wisely, Alpha Caleb. Your pack's future depends on it." After they left, Daphne and Caleb sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "You're going to hand me over." "Am I?" He didn't look at her, focus fixed on papers scattered across his desk. "It's the smart play. Keep your pack, keep your power, sacrifice the dangerous outsider who's been nothing but trouble since she arrived." "You're right." He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. "It is the smart play." The words hit her harder than any physical blow. She'd known this moment would come, had prepared herself for it, but somehow the reality still felt like betrayal. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow evening. They want a formal ceremony, witnesses, the full ritual of justice." His voice was flat, empty of the heat that usually burned between them. "I'm sorry, Daphne. But I won't sacrifice my pack for one wolf, no matter what she means to me." She nodded, throat too tight for words. Of course he'd choose them over her. Of course power would win over whatever twisted emotion existed between them. "I understand," she managed. "Do you?" Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to interpret. "I hope so." That night, Daphne lay in her old cell, the door unlocked now, but somehow more of a prison than it had ever been before. Tomorrow, she would die. The council would make an example of her, and Caleb would watch it happen to protect everything he'd built. She should run. Should shift to her shadow wolf form and disappear into the night. The council was powerful, but they were also old, set in their ways. She could evade them, find somewhere to hide, maybe even start over. But as she stared at the ceiling, all she could think about was the look in Caleb's eyes when he'd agreed to hand her over. There had been something there, something that didn't match his words. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. The door opened to reveal Scarlet, beautiful, perfect Scarlet who'd been Caleb's intended mate before Daphne's arrival had complicated everything. "Hello, sister," Scarlet said, stepping into the cell with a smile that was all sharp teeth and deadly intent. "Sister?" Daphne sat up slowly, every instinct screaming danger. "Oh, did I not mention?" Scarlet's laugh was like breaking crystal. "We're family, you and I, same father, different mothers. Though I suppose father never told you about his little indiscretions." The words hit Daphne like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Think about it, Daphne. Think about why you never fit in with the Shadowmere pack, why your wolf took so long to emerge, why you're the first shadow wolf born in over a century." Scarlet moved closer, and Daphne caught her scent, familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. Father had quite the taste for forbidden fruit. My mother was shadow wolf too, before the council found her. "The council killed your mother?" "Oh no, dear sister. I killed my mother." Scarlet's smile was beautiful and terrible. "For them. I've been their agent since I was old enough to shift, tracking down shadow wolf bloodlines and eliminating them before they could become a threat." Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. "You've been watching me. For 18 years. Waiting for your wolf to emerge, waiting for you to become enough of a threat to justify action." Scarlet examined her nails with casual indifference. I thought I'd failed when you couldn't shift. Imagine my surprise when reports started coming in about a shadow wolf in Nightfall territory. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow, when the council executes you, I want you to know that it was family who delivered the killing blow. Scarlet moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Daphne? Caleb knows. He's known what I am since the moment I arrived here 6 months ago. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Daphne alone with the terrible weight of betrayal. Not just from Caleb, but from the sister she'd never known existed, the family that had been hunting her since birth. Tomorrow, she would face the council's justice. And when she died, it would be surrounded by enemies wearing the faces of those she'd trusted. In the darkness of her cell, Daphne smiled. It was a cold expression, sharp with newly awakened malice. If they wanted to see what a shadow wolf could really do, she'd be happy to show them. But first, she had some family business to settle. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, she wouldn't be the prey. Chapter 6. The first outcast arrived 3 days after the council declared them rogues. Daphne found him at the gates of what had once been Nightfall territory, a scarred young wolf with eyes that had seen too much violence, clutching a letter bearing their seal. The same seal that now marked them as enemies of civilized werewolf society. You're the shadow wolf, he said, not a question but a statement of fact. I am. She studied him carefully, noting the way he held himself, the defensive tension that spoke of a life spent expecting attack. And you are? David Crane. Former member of the Riverside Pack, until they decided my battle scars made me unfit for civilized company. His smile was bitter as old coffee. Heard you were building something new out here. Something for wolves like us. Behind him, more figures emerged from the tree line. A dozen wolves, maybe more, all bearing the look of those who'd been cast aside by their birth packs. Too damaged, too dangerous, too different to fit into the rigid hierarchies that governed werewolf society. Define wolves like us, Daphne said. The unwanted. The broken. The ones who don't fit. David's eyes met hers without flinching. The ones who need a place to belong. From the shadows of the compound, Caleb materialized like darkness given form. Since the council's declaration, he'd changed, become something harder, more dangerous. The mask of civilized Alpha had finally fallen away completely. And what makes you think we want recruits? He asked, voice carrying the edge of threat. Because, said a voice from behind the group, you're going to need an army. The newcomer stepped forward, and Daphne felt her blood turn to ice. Zacharias. Her father. Alpha of the Shadowmere Pack and the man who'd sold her like livestock to pay his debts. Hello, daughter, he said, the word dripping with disdain. Father. She kept her voice level despite the rage building in her chest. Come to gloat over the council's judgment? Come to offer you one last chance. Zacharias moved closer, and behind him, she could see more wolves emerging from the forest. Not outcasts this time, but warriors. Shadowmere fighters in full battle gear. Surrender yourself for proper execution, and I'll spare your followers. Daphne looked around at the small group of outcasts who'd sought sanctuary with them. Damaged, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But also desperate for something she and Caleb could provide, a place where being different wasn't a death sentence. And if I refuse? Then we'll take you by force. Zacharias's smile was sharp as winter. The council has sanctioned this action. You're a rogue wolf harboring an abomination. That makes you fair game. Interesting. Caleb stepped up beside Daphne, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic. Because the way I see it, you're trespassing on our territory with hostile intent. Your territory? Zacharias laughed, the sound carrying no warmth. You were declared rogue 3 days ago. You have no territory, no pack rights, no protection under werewolf law. Then I suppose, Daphne said softly, we're free to make our own laws. The change came over her like lightning, not the slow transformation she'd learned to control, but the explosive shift of a predator pushed too far. Shadow wolf form erupted from her human shape, darkness and starlight given flesh and fang. Around them, chaos erupted. The outcasts shifted to defensive positions while Zacharias's warriors moved to surround them. But this wasn't the helpless girl he'd sold months ago. This was something new and terrible and utterly without fear. She hit him before he could shift, shadow dark jaws clamping around his throat in a hold that should have been killing. Instead, she held him there, letting him feel exactly how close to death he was dancing. Shift, she commanded through the bond that tied Alpha to Alpha. Fight me properly, or die like the coward you've always been. He shifted beneath her, gray wolf form expanding as he tried to throw her off. But she was ready for it, had been planning this moment since the day he'd handed her over to Caleb like a piece of property. They rolled across the courtyard in a tangle of fur and fury, both wolves snarling and snapping for advantage. But where Zacharias fought with the calculated precision of traditional pack combat, Daphne fought like the shadow she'd become, unpredictable, flowing, striking from angles that shouldn't have existed. Around them, the two groups clashed in smaller skirmishes. The outcasts were outnumbered, but they fought with the desperate fury of wolves who had nothing left to lose. And leading them, Caleb moved through enemy fighters like death itself, his massive black wolf form cutting down any who tried to interfere with Daphne's battle. The end came suddenly. Zacharias had been wearing down, his older reflexes no match for shadow-enhanced speed. When he left his flank exposed for just a heartbeat, Daphne was there. This time, she didn't hold back. Zacharias shifted back to human form as he died, gray eyes going wide with something that might have been regret. Or maybe just surprise that his broken daughter had finally found her fangs. "It's finished," Daphne said, stepping back from his body. "No," said a familiar voice from the edge of the courtyard. "It's just beginning." Scarlet stood there like an avenging angel, still beautiful, still perfect, still radiating the casual confidence of someone who'd never met a problem she couldn't manipulate her way out of. "Sister," she continued, smiling that sharp-edged smile. "You've made quite the mess. Not as much as you have." Daphne shifted back to human form, not caring about nudity or vulnerability. "How long have you been planning this? How long have you been working to destroy our family? Our family was never meant to exist." Scarlet moved closer, and Daphne caught her scent, familiar, family, but tainted with something that made her skin crawl. Shadow wolves and light wolves breeding together? Creating something the council couldn't control? They'd been hunting our bloodline for generations. Light wolves? The term was unfamiliar, ancient. "Oh, you didn't know?" Scarlet's laugh was like breaking crystal. "I suppose father never told you about your twin brother. About little Daniel who died so tragically in his cradle." The world tilted around Daphne. Twin brother. A sibling she'd never known existed, never been told about, never been allowed to mourn. "He died of fever," she whispered, remembering the story she'd been told as a child. "He died of suffocation." Scarlet's smile was beautiful and terrible. "I was only 6 years old, but even then I knew what the prophecy meant. Twins born of shadow and light, destined to rule all werewolves together. Destined to overthrow the council's order and remake our world." Understanding hit Daphne like a physical blow. "You killed him. I saved us all from chaos." Scarlet examined her nails with casual indifference. A light wolf paired with a shadow wolf? They would have been unstoppable. Better to eliminate half the threat while it was still helpless. The rage that filled Daphne then was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Not the hot fury of battle, but something cold and vast and utterly consuming. Shadow power radiated from her skin like heat, making the air itself seem to darken. "You murdered my brother." The words came out like a death sentence. "I murdered a potential tyrant." Scarlet finally looked up, meeting Daphne's eyes without flinching. "Just like I'm going to murder you." The battle that followed was nothing like the one with Zacharias. Where he had fought with honor and tradition, Scarlet fought with the cold calculation of a trained assassin. Every move was precise, calculated, designed to end the fight quickly and efficiently. But Daphne was no longer the broken wolf Scarlet had spent years studying. She was something new, something that fed on darkness and grew stronger with every drop of blood spilled. And she had 18 years of rage to fuel her. When it ended, Scarlet lay broken in the dirt, her perfect face finally showing something other than cruel amusement. The prophecy, she gasped. Even without your twin, you're still. Still what? Daphne knelt beside her dying sister, close enough to see the fear finally creeping into those familiar eyes. Still going to change everything. Then she was gone, and Daphne was alone with the weight of revelations that reshaped her entire understanding of herself. A twin brother. A light wolf who could have balanced her darkness, made her something more than the monster she'd become. Stolen from her before she'd even known he existed, by a sister who'd spent decades planning their family's destruction. Daphne. Caleb's voice came from behind her, gentle despite the violence they'd just survived. She turned to find him watching her with something that might have been concern. Around them, the courtyard was littered with bodies, enemies and allies alike who'd paid the price for this family war. It's over, she said, though the words felt hollow. No. He reached out to touch her face, fingers coming away stained with blood that wasn't entirely hers. This is just the beginning. He was right, she realized. The council would send more assassins, more armies, more perfect soldiers like Scarlet who'd been trained from birth to hunt shadow wolves. The war had just started. But they weren't defenseless anymore. The outcasts who'd survived the battle were looking to them with something approaching worship, desperate for leaders who understood what it meant to be unwanted by the world. What do we do now? Asked David, the scarred wolf who'd been their first recruit. Daphne looked around at the ragtag collection of misfits and monsters who'd thrown their lot in with hers. Broken wolves, damaged fighters, creatures too dangerous for civilized society. But also loyal, brave, and utterly without fear. Her pack. Her family. Her army. Now, she said, voice carrying the authority of someone who'd finally found her purpose, we build something new. Something better than what came before. And the council? Daphne's smile was sharp as winter starlight. The council is about to learn why shadow wolves were hunted to extinction. And why that was a mistake. Around them, the survivors howled, not in mourning, but in promise. The age of hiding was over. The age of fear was ending. The age of shadows had begun. And at its heart, two monsters who'd found love in the darkness prepared to remake the world in their own image. Chapter 7. The screaming had stopped an hour ago, but Caleb could still hear it echoing through the stone corridors of their stronghold. He found Daphne in the dungeon, washing blood from her hands with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this too many times before. The council spy they'd captured lay crumpled in the corner, breathing but broken in ways that went far beyond the physical. Did he talk? Caleb asked, though he already knew the answer. They always talked when Daphne was done with them. Eventually. She dried her hands on a clean towel, her movements calm and controlled. The council has 3 more strike teams moving toward our territory. They'll arrive within the week. And you had to, he gestured toward the barely conscious figure. I had to make sure he was telling the truth. Daphne turned to face him, and what he saw in her eyes made his blood run cold. Nothing. No guilt, no regret, no flicker of the woman who'd once spit defiance in his face rather than submit. Just empty darkness where her soul used to be. 6 months had passed since Scarlet's death, since Daphne learned the truth about her murdered twin brother. 6 months of watching the woman he'd claimed as his mate transform into something that scared even him. Daphne. Don't. Her voice cut through his words like a blade. Don't try to lecture me about mercy when you taught me that weakness gets you killed. She was right, and that was the hell of it. Every lesson in cruelty she'd learned from him. Every technique she used to break their enemies, he'd shown her first. He'd wanted to forge her into a weapon, and he'd succeeded beyond his darkest imagination. But weapons, he was learning, were dangerous things to wield. Especially when they started thinking for themselves. The compound they'd built in the mountains had grown into something resembling a small city. Outcasts and rogues arrived daily, drawn by whispered stories of the shadow wolf who offered sanctuary to those with nowhere else to go. What they found was protection, yes, but at a price that grew steeper with each passing day. Daphne ruled them through fear now. Not the respectful wariness she'd once commanded, but genuine terror. Wolves who displeased her disappeared into the dungeons. Those who questioned her orders were made examples of in ways that left the survivors too traumatized to speak of what they'd witnessed. The council spy won't be the only one who talks, she continued, stepping over the broken body without a glance. Fear is a language everyone understands. When word spreads about what happens to their agents here, they'll think twice before sending more. Or they'll send an army instead of spies. Daphne's smile was sharp as winter. Let them come. I'll show them what real monsters look like. The worst part was how beautiful she remained. Physical perfection untouched by the darkness that had consumed everything else about her. Wolves still stared when she passed, but now they looked away quickly, afraid to meet her eyes for too long. That night, Caleb found her standing on the balcony of their private quarters, staring out at the lights of their growing domain. The mountain wind whipped her dark hair around her face, making her look like some ancient goddess of war and vengeance. "Do you remember," he said, joining her at the railing, "when you tried to poison me?" "Which time?" She didn't look at him, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond their walls. "The first time. You were so angry, so determined to make me pay for what I'd done to you." He studied her profile, searching for some trace of the woman who'd fought him with such passionate fury. "You had fire then. Purpose beyond just causing pain. I had delusions then." Now she did turn to him, and he saw himself reflected in her eyes like a ghost. "I thought there was some nobility in resistance, some honor in choosing to be better than my enemies. My brother's murder taught me the truth." "What truth?" "That honor is a luxury for people who've never had to dig their own graves." Her voice was flat, empty of everything except cold certainty. "Scarlet killed Daniel because she knew he would have made me weak. Made me believe in something other than survival. And now? Now I understand what we really are." She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the lingering scent of fear on her clothes. "We're predators, Caleb. Apex hunters in a world full of prey. Everything else is just pretty lies we tell ourselves to sleep better at night." He wanted to argue, wanted to point out that they'd once been more than just monsters wearing human faces. But when he looked at what their empire had become, at the trail of broken bodies and shattered minds they'd left in their wake, he couldn't find the words. 3 days later, the crisis came to a head. Zacharias Webb had been one of their first recruits, a scarred veteran who'd lost his pack to council purges. He'd served loyally for months, never questioning orders, never stepping out of line. His only crime was asking why they were torturing prisoners instead of simply executing them. Caleb found Daphne in the courtyard, standing over Zacharias's body while their assembled pack watched in horrified silence. The man's face was a ruin of claw marks, his throat torn open in a way that spoke of deliberate, prolonged suffering. "He questioned my methods," Daphne said without turning around. "In front of the others. I couldn't allow that kind of insubordination to spread." He was asking a reasonable question. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest as he looked at the faces surrounding them. Fear, yes, but also disgust. Horror at what their leader had become. Zacharias was a good soldier. Zacharias was a weakness I couldn't afford. She finally turned to face him, and he saw blood under her fingernails. "Would you prefer I let every wolf who joined us think they could question my decisions? Challenge my authority? I'd prefer you remember the difference between leadership and tyranny." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Around them, the pack held its collective breath, sensing the shift in dynamics between their two alphas. "Tyranny?" Daphne's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "You taught me that power without fear is just an invitation for betrayal. You showed me that mercy is a luxury that gets you killed. And now you want to lecture me about going too far?" "Yes." The admission came out of him like a confession. "Because I was wrong." Silence. Complete and absolute, broken only by the mountain wind and the distant sound of wolves moving restlessly through the compound. Wrong? Daphne stepped closer, shadow power radiating from her skin like heat. About what, exactly? About buying me from my father like a piece of livestock? About teaching me that survival required becoming something inhuman? Or just wrong about thinking you could control the monster you created? All of it. He met her eyes without flinching, even as his wolf instinct screamed at him to run. I was wrong about all of it. The fight that followed shattered the courtyard and half the buildings around it. They came together like forces of nature colliding, Shadow Wolf and Nightmare Alpha in a dance of destruction that had been building for months. This wasn't the controlled violence of their early challenges or the passionate fury of their mating battles. This was two apex predators trying to tear each other apart on the most fundamental level. She was faster now, her shadow powers evolved beyond what they'd been during her first transformation. She moved like living darkness, striking from angles that shouldn't have existed, her claws leaving trails of midnight in the air. But he was stronger, and he had something she'd lost along the way, the ability to fight for something other than destruction. Every blow he landed was calculated, designed not to kill but to incapacitate, to force her to see what she'd become. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Around them, their pack scattered for cover as buildings collapsed and the very ground cracked under the force of their conflict. It ended when they both collapsed, bloodied and exhausted, in what remained of the courtyard. Neither had won, neither had lost, and both were too damaged to continue. This has to stop, Caleb gasped, his enhanced healing already working to close the worst wounds. What you've become, what we've become, it's destroying everything we tried to build. Daphne lay on her back a few feet away, staring up at the star-filled sky. Blood ran from a dozen cuts on her face and arms, but she seemed oblivious to the pain. I used to dream about him, she said suddenly. My brother. Daniel. I'd imagine what he might have looked like, what kind of wolf he would have been. Whether he would have been strong enough to balance out my darkness. Caleb said nothing, sensing this was important. After Scarlet told me the truth, the dream stopped. Instead, I started seeing what could have been. A world where shadow and light ruled together, where we didn't have to hide what we were or apologize for being different. She turned her head to look at him. Do you know why that vision frightened me more than any nightmare? Why? Because it required hope. And hope is the cruelest poison of all. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. All her cruelty, all her systematic destruction of everything soft and vulnerable in their world, it wasn't madness or corruption. It was self-protection taken to its logical extreme. You're afraid, he said. I'm realistic. She sat up slowly, wincing as movement pulled at her injuries. The council will never stop hunting us. Other packs will never accept us. We'll always be monsters in their eyes, no matter how noble our intentions or how much good we try to do. So your solution is to become the monsters they think we are? My solution is to stop pretending we have any other choice. She met his eyes, and for the first time in months, he saw something other than emptiness there. Pain. Raw, bleeding anguish that she'd been hiding behind walls of ice and fury. I can't survive losing anyone else, Caleb. I can't go through what I felt when I learned about Daniel. So I'm choosing to be alone before the world can take that choice away from me. The pieces finally clicked into place. Every brutal decision, every act of casual cruelty, every step further into darkness, it was all an elaborate suicide mission. She was destroying everything good about herself before life could take it from her. What if, he said carefully, instead of running from what we are, we embraced it completely? What do you mean? I mean stop trying to be the leaders these wolves deserve. Stop pretending we're capable of redemption or nobility or any of the things civilized society values. He stood, extending a hand to help her up. What if we just accepted that we're monsters and found a way to be monsters together? She stared at his offered hand for a long moment. You're talking about giving up any pretense of being better than our enemies. I'm talking about being honest about what we've always been. He kept his hand extended, waiting. We're not heroes, Daphne. We never were. But we don't have to be villains alone. She took his hand. What followed wasn't redemption in any traditional sense. Instead, it was a kind of dark absolution, an acceptance of what they become and a decision to stop fighting their own nature. They rebuilt their empire, but this time without pretense. No more talk of liberation or justice or creating a better world for outcast wolves. They offered protection to those who needed it, yes, but in exchange for absolute loyalty and the understanding that mercy was not part of the bargain. The council strike teams arrived a week later to find a fortress that had transformed overnight. Gone were the desperate refugees and broken outcasts. In their place stood an army of the damned, led by two creatures who'd stopped pretending to be anything other than what the world had made them. The battle was over before it began. That night, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking their domain, Caleb realized something had fundamentally changed between them. The desperate, clawing need that had once defined their relationship had evolved into something darker and more stable. "Do you regret it?" Daphne asked, not needing to specify what she meant. "Which part? Creating you, claiming you, or becoming this?" "All of it." He considered the question seriously. Below them, their subjects moved through the compound with the efficient purposefulness of wolves who knew exactly what they were and what was expected of them. No more pretense, no more moral confusion. Just honest predators in a world that had always been eat or be eaten. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret any of it." She leaned against him, and for the first time in months, the gesture felt natural rather than calculated. "Neither do I." They were monsters. They'd accepted that truth completely, along with all its implications. But they were monsters who'd found each other in the darkness, and that made all the difference. The age of pretending was over. The age of honest darkness had begun. And somewhere in the shadows between damnation and acceptance, two lost souls had finally found their way home. Chapter 8. The dead shouldn't be able to scream, but the ghost of Daniel Shadowmere was shrieking loud enough to shatter glass. Daphne stood in the center of the summoning circle, watching her twin brother's spirit writhe in supernatural agony as Scarlet's magic forced him to take solid form. Even in death, he was beautiful, golden hair where hers was dark, eyes like summer sky instead of winter storm, everything about him radiating the light she'd never possessed. "Hello, sister," Daniel said, his voice carrying otherworldly sorrow. "I've missed you. You're not real." Daphne's words came out steady despite the earthquake of emotion threatening to tear her apart. "You're just another one of Scarlet's tricks." "Oh, he's real enough." Scarlet emerged from the shadows at the edge of the abandoned warehouse, looking exactly as she had the night she died, perfect, beautiful, and utterly without conscience. "Death is just another kind of prison, dear sister. And I've learned how to pick the locks. This should have been impossible." Scarlet was dead, had been dead for 2 years. Daphne had watched the life drain from her eyes, had felt her sister's last breath against her cheek. But here she stood, solid as flesh and twice as dangerous. "Necromancy," Caleb said from his position near the door. He'd been with Daphne when Scarlet's message arrived, challenging her to this final confrontation. "You've been studying the forbidden arts. I've been studying survival." Scarlet's smile was sharp as winter. "Did you really think death would stop me from finishing what I started? From completing my mission? Your mission failed the moment you murdered our brother." Daphne took a step toward the summoning circle, power radiating from her skin like heat. "I'm not the broken wolf you spent years watching anymore." "No," Scarlet agreed. "You're something much worse. A shadow wolf who's learned to love her darkness, who's built an empire on fear and cruelty. You're everything the council was right to fear." Daniel's spirit turned toward Daphne, and the pain in his ethereal eyes was almost unbearable. "Is it true, sister? Have you become the monster they said you would?" The question hit her harder than any physical blow. This was why Scarlet had brought him back, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. To show Daphne exactly what she'd lost when she chose darkness over light. "Yes," she said simply. "I have." "Then let me help you find your way back." Daniel reached toward her, his ghostly fingers glowing with soft radiance. Let me be the light you've lost. For a moment, Daphne almost reached back. The brother she'd never known, the balance she'd always been missing, the other half of her soul standing right there offering salvation. It would be so easy to take his hand, to let his light burn away the shadows that had consumed her. Instead, she stepped backward, directly into Caleb's arms. I don't want to find my way back, she said, feeling his strength supporting her, his darkness matching her own. I like who I've become. Daniel's face crumpled with grief. Sister, please. I can save you from this path. I can make you whole again. I am whole. Daphne leaned back against Caleb's chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I found my balance in something better than light. In him? Daniel's gaze shifted to Caleb, and divine judgment blazed in those summer sky eyes. In the monster who broke you? Who taught you that love requires pain? In the monster who accepts me exactly as I am. Daphne turned in Caleb's arms, meeting his dark gaze. Who never asked me to be anything other than what I chose to become. The love that passed between them in that moment wasn't soft or gentle or pure. It was fierce and possessive and built on a foundation of shared violence. But it was also unbreakable, forged in fire and tempered by pain into something stronger than steel. You see? Scarlett's voice dripped with disgust. Even faced with redemption, she chooses damnation. This is why shadow wolves can't be allowed to exist. They corrupt everything they touch. Including you? Caleb asked, his voice carrying dark amusement. Scarlett's perfect composure cracked for just a moment. What do you mean? I mean necromancy doesn't work on the living. Daphne pulled away from Caleb, studying her sister with new understanding. You're not alive anymore, are you? You died in our last fight, just like I thought. But you found a way to anchor your spirit to this world through hatred. Very good. Scarlett's form flickered slightly, revealing the truth beneath her perfect facade. Hatred is a powerful force, sister. More powerful than love, more enduring than hope. It's what's kept me fighting even after death. It's also what's going to destroy you. Daphne began walking toward the summoning circle, power building around her like a storm. Because hatred without purpose is just madness. And madness always consumes itself in the end. I have purpose. Scarlett shrieked, her ghostly form solidifying with rage. I'm going to finish what the council started. I'm going to eliminate the Shadow Wolf bloodline once and for all. No, Daphne said calmly. You're not. The battle that followed shook the foundations of the warehouse. Scarlett might have been dead, but death had only made her more dangerous. She fought with the fury of the damned, wielding necromantic magic that could have torn most wolves apart. But Daphne was no longer the frightened girl who'd first discovered her shadow powers. She was a queen of darkness, a creature who'd learned to embrace every terrible thing about herself. And she had something Scarlett had never possessed, someone who fought beside her instead of using her. Caleb moved like a force of nature, his massive alpha strength perfectly complementing Daphne's shadow magic. Where she was fluid darkness, he was solid destruction. Where she was subtle precision, he was overwhelming power. Together, they were unstoppable. The end came when Daniel's spirit broke free of Scarlett's control. Enough, he cried, his ethereal form blazing with divine light. I won't be used as a weapon against my sister anymore. You don't have a choice, Scarlett snarled, pouring more power into the binding spell. You're dead. I control you. You control my form, Daniel agreed. But not my will. And I choose to help her, not hurt her. What happened next defied every law of magic Daphne knew. Instead of trying to purify her darkness, Daniel's light merged with it, creating something entirely new. Not the balance the prophecies had spoken of, but synthesis, shadow and light combined into something greater than either could be alone. Power exploded through Daphne like liquid starlight, burning away every limitation she'd ever accepted. She was shadow and light, darkness and radiance, monster and angel all at once. And in that moment of perfect unity with her brother's spirit, she finally understood what they could have been together. It lasted only seconds before Daniel's form began to fade. "I have to go," he said, his voice growing distant. "This isn't my world anymore. But sister, I'm proud of what you've become. You found your own way to be whole." "Daniel. Love him," her brother whispered as he faded away. "Love him with everything you are, darkness and all. That's the only light you'll ever need." Then he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of summer roses and the echo of forgiveness. Scarlet screamed as her anchoring spirit disappeared, her ghostly form beginning to unravel without Daniel's power to sustain her. "This isn't over. I'll find another way." "No," Daphne said quietly. "You won't." She reached out with her transformed power, not to destroy Scarlet but to grant her something far more devastating: peace. The hatred that had kept her tethered to the mortal world simply dissolved. Without it, she had no reason to remain. I can't." Scarlet's form flickered like a dying candle. "The mission. I have to complete the mission. The mission is over." Daphne's voice carried infinite compassion for the sister who'd spent her life as a weapon. "You can rest now." Scarlet's last expression wasn't rage or hatred, but simple confusion. As if she'd forgotten what it felt like to exist without a war to fight. Then she was gone, passing on to whatever waited beyond the veil. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of their breathing. "Is it finished?" Caleb asked. "It's finished." Daphne sagged against him, the weight of transformation leaving her exhausted. No more council assassins. No more family secrets. No more ghosts from the past. Just us. Just us. They walked out of that warehouse hand in hand, two monsters who'd found their perfect match in each other. Behind them, the building collapsed as if unable to withstand the weight of so much resolution. 5 years later, their kingdom had grown beyond anything either of them had imagined possible. The mountain stronghold now sprawled across 3 peaks, home to over 1,000 wolves who'd found sanctuary in darkness. They came from every corner of the continent, outcasts and rogues, the broken and the damned, all seeking a place where being different wasn't a death sentence. Daphne ruled them with an iron fist wrapped in understanding. She was still ruthless, still capable of terrible cruelty when circumstances demanded it. But she was also fair, protecting her people with the fierce devotion of someone who knew what it meant to have nowhere else to go. Caleb had grown into his role as her partner in every sense of the word. Not just her mate, but her equal in power and authority. Together, they'd created something unprecedented in werewolf history, a pack that thrived on accepting its members' darkest impulses instead of trying to suppress them. The council had tried to destroy them 3 more times in those 5 years. Each attempt had ended in devastating failure, until even the oldest elders were forced to acknowledge that the Age of Shadow had truly begun. Now Daphne stood on the same balcony where she'd once planned to destroy herself, watching the sunset paint their kingdom in shades of gold and crimson. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the twin heartbeats of the children who would be born within the month. "Worried about them?" Caleb asked, joining her at the railing. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if they inherit the worst of both of us? What if we create something even more dangerous than ourselves? Then we'll love them anyway." He placed his hand over hers, fingers intertwining. "And we'll teach them that being dangerous isn't the same as being evil. The council will come for them. Let them try." His smile was sharp as winter starlight. "Our children will be born into a world where monsters are allowed to exist. They'll never have to hide what they are or apologize for their nature." The first child was born at midnight, emerging into the world with a howl that shattered every window in the medical wing. She was shadow made flesh, darkness given form, her infant eyes already blazing with the terrible beauty of her mother's power. They named her Luna, for the moon that had witnessed their love story. The second child arrived an hour later, silent and watchful, his presence commanding attention the moment he drew breath. He would be an alpha like his father, born with the strength to rule and the wisdom to know when mercy was a luxury they couldn't afford. They named him Dante, for the journey through hell that had brought them together. As Daphne held her children for the first time, she thought about the prophecy that had started it all. Twins born of shadow and light, destined to rule together. The council had been right to fear what they might become, just wrong about which twins would fulfill the destiny. "What do you think they'll call us in the history books?" she asked Caleb as he settled beside her on the hospital bed. "Tyrants, probably. Monsters who corrupted an entire generation of wolves." "Good." She looked down at their sleeping children, already planning the world they would inherit. "Let them remember us exactly as we were." Years passed. Their children grew strong and fierce, raised in a kingdom where love was measured not by gentleness but by the willingness to accept someone's darkness along with their light. Luna learned to wield shadows like weapons, while Dante developed his father's gift for inspiring absolute loyalty through strength. Other supernatural creatures began seeking them out: vampires tired of hiding, witches burned by persecution, demons who'd grown weary of being blamed for humanity's sins. All of them found welcome in the kingdom of monsters. The world changed around them, forced to acknowledge that the age of hiding was over. Supernatural beings stepped out of the shadows, not to integrate with human society but to claim their own space within it. And at the center of it all, two souls who'd found their perfect match in each other's darkness continued to build something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they stood together watching their children play in the courtyard below, Caleb asked the question that had been haunting him for years. "Do you ever wonder what we might have been if we'd chosen differently? If we'd tried to be better instead of accepting what we are?" Daphne considered it seriously. "Sometimes. But then I remember that better is a relative concept. We saved thousands of wolves who had nowhere else to go. We created a place where being different isn't a death sentence. We raised children who will never have to hide their true nature. Through fear and violence. Through honesty." She turned to face him, and he saw no regret in her eyes. Only love, fierce, possessive, and absolutely uncompromising. "We never lied to ourselves or anyone else about what we were. We built our kingdom on truth instead of pretty lies. And you don't regret any of it? Not a single moment." She reached up to touch his face, fingers tracing the scars that mapped their shared history. "I love you exactly as you are, monster, Alpha, the darkness that matches my own. Why would I regret finding my perfect match?" That night, as they lay in bed listening to the sounds of their kingdom settling into sleep, Daphne reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From broken slave to queen of darkness, from enemy to mate to equal, every step had been necessary, every choice had led them closer to this moment. "They called us monsters," she whispered into the darkness. "They were right," Caleb replied, pulling her closer. "But monsters, it turns out, love the most fiercely of all." In the distance, wolves howled their approval of the night, and two souls who'd found their home in each other's darkness finally understood what happily ever after really meant. Not redemption. Not transformation into something society could accept. Just love. Pure, honest, uncompromising love between two creatures who'd learned that being monsters didn't mean they had to be alone. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for more upcoming stories.